we are going to begin our session, Retooling Library GIS Services for Online Learning and Research. We've got a great set of speakers this morning, and we are going to explore how library services have been changing as learning and research moves online. Both over the long term, it's been moving online as more scholars and students have wanted to work remotely, but clearly a lot more of it has been moving online in response to the pandemic. So we're going to look at some issues such as new technologies or changes in work practices that people might have implemented. And we'll have a series of speakers and then some discussion at the end. So our panelists represent a mix of institutions, both large and small institutions, big city and more suburban or rural settings, and public and private institutions. With that, I'm going to ask Megan to take it away. So Megan is the GIS librarian in the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship. And Emory is a private institution that has a majority of undergraduate students. It's a moderately sized institution, about 15,000 students. So Megan, could you please start your sharing?
Thanks, Angie. So I work in the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship in Atlanta, Georgia. I am the GIS librarian. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how instruction has been changing over time for us in the pre-COVID times as well, just kind of over the several years that I've been at Emory, and then also more recently how we're kind of retooling and reformatting everything and how that's going in the few months of experience that we have. So this is just a screenshot from a spatial statistics workshop I did back in the spring. So a little bit about the setup where I work. So the ECDS, as I will call it for short, falls under Library and Information Technology Services at Emory. So there's like the library and there's IT and then there's us. It's a discipline neutral space for GIS support and instruction among many other topics. So I'm kind of the GIS person, and then we have people that do numerical data analysis, and we have textual analysis and web developers and virtual and augmented reality, digital publishing and pedagogy. So it's lots of different stuff going on in here. It's not a just GIS center, but that is where it lives. I am the site license manager for the Emory campus, so that's housed in our department. Emory doesn't have some of the kind of typical departments that would be the big heavy homes for GIS. We don't have geography. We don't have any sort of urban planning department. We do have a public health school that has a lot of users, and we have an environmental science department in the college. So instruction is a big part of my job in many formats. This is visits to classes to do kind of one-off sessions. This is, I co-taught an intro to GIS course in the public health school in the spring. It's lots of one-on-one consultations. But the main thing I'm going to talk about today is our workshop series that we offer as part of our department every semester. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say instruction from now on. So who attends our workshops, and what does this mean for how and what we teach? So this is actually a breakdown from the spring of the kind of affiliation of our attendees. And the summer, I haven't completely finished tallying since it just ended our summer series, but the breakdown's actually very similar. So this is kind of how it tends to work out. This is for like live attendees. So our workshops cover a variety of topics, some of which are GIS and mapping, also data visualization and R coding and all sorts of topics. Working with census data, we cover a lot of stuff. So we have a pretty even mix of students, faculty, and staff. So we have a really wide audience. These are open to anyone. So some people are wanting to use these tools for research versus for their instruction, versus practitioners like researchers in the medical school, things like that. From a wide variety of departments, pretty much like everybody on campus. It's a really even mix of academic departments, professional schools, administration, campus services. So one thing I've begun to realize over time, talking to people and reading the feedback from the workshops, is that these are often the only source of training that someone gets before they use GIS. They're not they can't, for whatever reason, take an actual course on this topic. So coming to these is kind of it before they dive in, which kind of changes the responsibility, I think, of what we're teaching. So we're really filling a gap, kind of a curriculum gap on campus where people need this training, but it's not necessarily available to everyone unless you're in one of those departments that maybe happens to have a course. So how has it changed over time? Just briefly, kind of looking back several years, when I first started at Emory, we didn't actually have access to a Windows computer lab where we could readily teach ArcGIS desktop software. And so early on, I did a lot of kind of conceptual, what is a shapefile, what is vector versus raster data, what is spatial data in general. Once we actually got access to that lab in the library, that's kind of a limitation of not, being a department with our own lab or something like that. Once we got access to that, I was able to actually start teaching the software. And I've just noticed over time that the topics have really shifted to focusing on teaching theory and best practices as opposed to just these exercises where you get in and click around and learn how to add data and how to change the symbology and how to export. These are all important things, but I've just really started to focus on understanding the why and when you would use tools. For example, we did this spatial statistics workshop in the spring for the first time. It's something people really had interest in that they weren't able to get anywhere else. But I just really wanted to be sure, especially with like ArcGIS Pro, these tools are so easy to, put your data in and run. I wanted to really spend time on like, why would you use one method over another? How do you interpret the results? I think that's an important thing when you realize who your audience is, and that they're going to run this stuff, whether or not you go over the understanding it. One thing I wanted to mention that's been interesting with instruction is that I sort of, a few years ago, the prospect of getting people to switch over to Pro was really daunting because Emory was very ingrained in ArcMap, especially the public health school, which is a big user base. And I've kind of gradually over the past few years started doing workshops where we would do part of it in ArcMap and part in Pro to kind of let people know it was out there. And then I suddenly switched over to all Pro about a year ago. And this year when we just did our campus license renewal, we had just way more people requesting Pro than ArcMap. So that has finally worked, that we've managed to get folks to switch over. And a lot of people have been introduced to that as the only tool. So that's been a useful thing. And then finally, we're teaching a data literacy series in the fall, just kind of talking about this idea of the big picture that people want to understand kind of the why and the how of creating and interpreting data visualizations of various sorts. So how are things changing as we move online? This is a nice little screenshot from a story maps workshop I did over the summer. So software access, the way this works at Emory, we had lots of people with installations on campus computers, individual faculty and labs and stuff. So we've had tons of requests for the personal computer access. That's been a fairly recent change with the licensing. That's been really exciting. Lots of people want to be able to work from home and access the software. We have, the public health school has a Porto virtual desktop that they can work off of. So that takes care of a big chunk of people. As far as the workshops changing as we move online, we've been doing 1-hour workshops over the summer, so they're shorter, they're on like best practices, more conceptual rather than hands-on, less interactive, but lots of people have been following up with consultations since they don't get the one-on-one interaction during the workshop. Lots of increased interest in the Esri training site as people are, realizing they're gonna have to do some of this stuff from home. And then a lot of focus on web-based tools for the fall. A lot of faculty are interested in using story maps and ArcGIS Online just because they're trying to make things as light and easy for students on their end at home with whatever computer and bandwidth they're dealing with. The idea of a totally web-based tool is kind of nice. And so a few takeaways from what we've learned so far on virtual workshops. The Zoom workshops have worked out just really surprisingly well. We've always had a really heavy focus on these in-person hands-on workshop where we can get 20 people in a room and work through activities and stop for questions and troubleshoot. But now we have, 50 or 60 people on a Zoom webinar. We've had registration and attendance have more than doubled from the spring to the summer. We're keeping the topics really short. People are tired of being on Zoom and they're a lot more likely to sign up for a 1-hour workshop, I think. They're less interactive, like I said, and There's been kind of a changing focus for us. Like, people are really interested in watching the workshops asynchronously. We've had a high interest in that, which I didn't really expect. And what's nice is that we can provide access to the kind of exercises for people to work through later. And we can spend the time in the workshop focusing on things that people really want to hear, is like, why would I pick this tool over another one? What are the advantages? What are some potential pitfalls? What would my data even have to look like before I use this tool? We've had really great feedback about, this was so helpful. I feel like I can apply this to my work, and like I can use this for my class in the fall. And then people can follow up individually with those specific questions. I think even with the recordings, people really like to watch a recording of somebody that they, kind of know in person teaching the subject, as opposed to just watching a tutorial. There are so many great tutorials out there already, but this gives them somebody that they can follow up with and say, can you explain that differently? Or can you tell me how I'll apply this to my specific project? So we're still learning very much, but hopefully some of those takeaways are helpful to other people in a similar situation. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it off to the next panelist.
Fantastic. And so while we're making that transition, we have one quick question. Can you share any of your workshop content? Is any of that publicly available, or is it just available to the Emory community?
Right now, it's only available to Emory because we're sharing through Canvas. This is a limitation that we're dealing with because we usually do have a few community visitors to our workshops. And we've been able to let them attend the live Zoom sessions, but as far as sharing the recordings and the handouts, right now it's limited to internal. Okay. Which I don't love, but it gets like 95% of the people that were initially interested.
Good to know. Okay. So our next presenter is Russ White at the California Polytechnic State University at San Luis Obispo. And so Russ is the data and GIS specialist at the Kennedy Library there. And Cal Poly is a public institution with a very high undergraduate population, about 22,000 students. So again, kind of a moderately sized institution and in more of a suburban or rural setting. So with that, Russ, take it away.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Angie. It's great to be joining everyone. I'd like to just present a few updates about the data and GIS services at Cal Poly's Kennedy Library. And I think we'll hear some similar themes about what are the trends and what are some of the transitions as we enter into the next upcoming fall. And so data and GIS services at Kennedy Library, we have the moniker now of the Digital Projects Lab, and we've intended it for this to be a space where students and faculty can come in and find data sets, meet with some peer experts, so consult with student assistants that we've hired to work with data with Python or with statistics with R, and then our GIS peer assistants to work with finding data and using GIS data across the different disciplines. And so thinking about the role of data and not just finding it or working with it or doing analysis, but then also presenting that information well, visualizing it and telling a good story. And even thinking about more currently about like the creative and expressive aspects of using data, trying to have a broad view of that. And that's been really exciting to work on, bringing those different services and those different skill sets together. And that's been a nice element of our library. We've been in the reference room area, and that's been our physical space. And one other draw in that is students can come in because these are, good performing desktop computers with dual screens, and they were also loaded with virtually all the software that campus had a license for. And the library was able to do that through a cloud paging approach that worked fairly well to be able to load all those different kinds of software like AutoCAD and GIS and SolidWorks. So students could come from outside their home lab area and then still be able to access that kind of software and do work, and then also get help from some of those technical disciplines nearby at our help desk. And so that was, we found successful in bringing kind of a critical mass of those students together. And then of course we had some transition to trying to replicate some of this virtually. And so even before this spring quarter with the advent of the pandemic, Cal Poly had begun a partnership with Amazon called the Digital Transformation Hub. And in part of that, they were exploring the AppStream approach for hosting or virtualizing applications to deliver through the browser. And so early in February, there was some testing going on to let's try out ArcMap or try out Pro just to see if we can test out this approach. And all of a sudden that became a rather essential part of the operation, was being able to deliver this software virtually as we went into spring quarter. So that was, it was eye-opening to be able to get that up and running. And that was ITS and the Transformation Hub really working hard to get that up and running. And then we helped by providing some of that testing to see how does ArcMap work and how does Pro work, and fine-tuning some of the configurations so that it was up and running as a usable tool. So some of the advantage of this approach was that lots of different software titles could be made available. There were some challenges though that we've kind of uncovered through the course of the quarter, and that like what we had tested is like, okay, Pro works and I can run some analysis tools and it's pretty performant. The challenges for a student is like when you're doing a long-term project, moving your data set from OneDrive onto this virtual computer and then moving it back to OneDrive to make sure that it saves became a challenge. And that's true in any situation, but it seems to be especially true in the virtual mode where you're launching a virtual computer and storing your data on the cloud and navigating all that so that the data doesn't get lost was a challenge. So I think what we're looking forward to in the fall is outlining that procedure more clearly for the students, and the faculty have been learning a lot about how to stage this so that you can continue to do ongoing projects successfully through virtual access to the software. So that was one of our big lessons learned in the early run-up as we set up in last spring quarter. One of the other services that we've been expanding is the type of student support. And through the library, we've had a relatively small group, maybe about 5 peer assistants that cover data and statistics and GIS. But it was actually the Writing and Learning Center through campus that had started to organize all the different peer tutoring efforts that were department by department in a lot of different settings, and pull them all under one roof. And that was actually located also in the library starting in this fall quarter. And so that tutoring became open to a wider group of students and then across many, many different subjects. And so we were able to partner with them and incorporate our students into that. And what was great was there was already a scheduling and appointment-based system that the students could sign in and get appointments with their specific subjects. And that also enabled us to transition well into the virtual mode where by spring quarter, all these appointments were conducted virtually. And so students could still use the same scheduler and sign up and meet up through Zoom with their peer assistant and continue doing tutoring. And so we found that to be useful to find those partnerships, and that helps ease the transition to adapting all these services online. And so it was great to see that we were able to continue doing that type of work. So doing GIS projects or working on programming support and still do that through virtual connections. And so we had 5 peer assistants. They worked between 5 and 10 hours a week. We had a lot of different appointments coming in, and it was great to see. Here's just the word cloud of what the descriptions of the appointments were like. And so there's a lot of looking for help and working on GIS and working on Python. Managing data and visualizing. And one other component that was nice was every once in a while we would have some overlap between our student assistants, where our data science student would overlap with our GIS student. And then just the right kind of question comes in where I'm trying to do a project that relies a little bit on both. I'm working on a Jupyter notebook with GIS. And so those students could kind of confer with each other and share some of that expertise. And that's really exciting to be able to, facilitate more of that kind of work at our service point. So we're hoping to do more of that is schedule those availabilities and let the students network with each other on their different skill sets, and then support more of these kinds of projects. I think I'll leave it there. That was a relatively quick run through of our transition and services, but hope that's helpful as a glimpse of what's happening at Cal Poly and at Kennedy Library.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Russ.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was great. So just one quick question for you as we make the next transition. Could you post links to your resources and the guide? Could you just post those in the chat for everyone? I think people are interested in seeing what you have. And while you're doing that, I will invite Patricia to start sharing her slides. And so our next speaker, Patricia Carbajales, is the executive director. Oh gosh, am I going to get the title right? The executive director for the Clemson Center for Geospatial Technologies. And so Clemson is a public institution in the South with a larger population than the other two we've heard from so far. Got a high undergraduate population and a high adoption of ArcGIS. So with that, Patricia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Angie. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Great. Well, I'm very happy to be here today. I really enjoyed the Education Summit so far. And I think part of the theme that I heard in the sessions yesterday will resonate again with these slides. So like Angie mentioned, I work at Clemson University, and similar to Emory, we don't have a traditional GIS or geography department. So our center main mission is to really support all GIS activities on campus. We're very fortunate that we have a partnership. Our center is a partnership between IT and the libraries, and that has proven very, very useful when COVID-19 hit. So here are two questions that I would like to focus on my presentation. The first one is, Angie kind of asked a series of questions, and I thought the first one was really interesting from a technical point of view. And it's regarding this question of what have you found helpful in making software accessible? You know, everything went remotely, and all of a sudden, how do we keep supporting, you know, towards the end of the semester for us, all of our GIS services and instruction? And I think this is something that got repeated yesterday at the summit over and over. And I'm glad to see that the community, everybody has the same approach, which is flexibility. And what I mean by that from flexibility is that we immediately try to move as much as we could by default to using SaaS or software as a service. So we can use ArcGIS Online, Insights, story maps, business analysts online. We try to just switch as quickly as possible to software as a service, because we knew it was just going to work. The people with Macs and students, there was not a problem with any of those. So that was our, you know, like immediate approach. Because we had a very good working relationship with IT, we had years of experience virtualizing desktop. I have to say they were not as successful as we would like them to be, but also it helps us to start pushing users towards virtualized environment. However, that virtualized environment didn't work for specific users where we have heavy data sets or 60 or more users trying to connect at the same time. So what IT was able to do is to allow for remote desktop into our GIS computers, like if the students were basically in the library accessing remotely the desktop. So that helped us with that third type of users that were, you know, much heavier users, bigger data sets, lots of analysis, and the virtual desktop, it was just not there for us yet. So what this means is that we had a very agile response to the diversity of users that we had. If they had weak connection, didn't have a lot of space or accessibility to data, their laptops were Macs or things like that, we were able to, these three possible options to just, you know, be very agile, quickly respond to it, and then also respond to the diversity. This allows us also for a higher outreach to patrons, and then most importantly was avoiding the disruption of our services at that critical time. The second question that I thought was interesting to talk about, to focus, is what have we found helpful in engaging students? And the reason why I thought this was a good question to answer, because we were surprised by the response and how we had to adapt our strategy moving forward. So the first point that I want to make is about staying connected. So COVID hits, we move everything online, and I was like, perfect. This is the time where we can just do asynchronous learning, where we pre-record all of our workshops, and then the students will not have any conflicts of a schedule. And I thought, our numbers will be, everybody all of a sudden went into a chaos mode will not be as great, but, with this flexibility, they could be very good. To my surprise, and now thinking in hindsight, it makes sense. Students and our staff that also attends our workshops and faculty, they wanted to stay connected. And so our synchronous offerings where we said this is the time, let's say like Fridays 9 to 12, had like 4 to 5 times more attendees than they were when they were asynchronous. So although we thought, giving a lot of flexibility will, open more opportunities, we heard feedback right away and say, no, we want to be pressured to have an hour, a time where we all meet. And so that makes sense now to me too, because whenever I want to use a webinar or attend, the fact that it's online, it really pressures me into attending, and I tend to not watch the recordings as much as I would like. So now in hindsight, it makes sense, but at the time I thought asynchronous was really the way to go. The second thing is that we really want to, it allows us to increase our availability. So moving online, we really try to bring it down a notch in terms of topics and technology that we will be focusing on. And so to make it easier, we're also not just making it a better experience for our traditional users, but also it's going to be a much better experience for non-traditional users, where they see GIS as this mythical, super technical and difficult technology that they were asked to learn, or they think is good for them to learn. And then the last thing that I want to mention is specialized outreach. So one thing that we learned also quickly is like about how do we communicate into our offerings. So we had a little bit more time to think about that. And it starts all with the name, right? So if I say, I'm going to create a workshop on cloud mapping with ArcGIS Online, you need to be into the GIS world to really understand that. But if I say something as unleash your creativity with the story maps, then I'm reaching a much wider audience. It doesn't seem this mythical and reachable kind of workshop that is so technical that people in certain disciplines, humanities, social sciences, will be like, that's going to be too technical for me. So I think that's all I have.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patricia. So one question for you while we make the transition. What did you do or have to do to make ArcGIS accessible and ADA compliant when making these transitions? Particularly, was there anything you needed to do for visually impaired students?
Yeah, so that was, that's something that we are, our ADA compliance department is always looking through our websites and through all of our teaching materials to make sure that we are complying with that. It's something that we've had, unfortunately, we were not able to solve those. We didn't have any instance. We had instance with some of those issues when we were in our classrooms, and so we were able to have a specialized keyboard and things like that, but we haven't encountered it yet so far in the past few months. So I think that's a great point, and it's something that we really need to look into it. So thank you for
being here. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so our next speaker is Him Mistry at New York University, where Him manages the data services department in the libraries and IT. So New York University is the largest among the institutions we're hearing from today, with 50,000 students, so double the size of some of the others. And it's a private institution in a big city setting, which I think may present some interesting challenges. In some ways, might just affect remote learning a little bit differently. So Him, Can you take it away, please?
Thank you, Angie, and for introducing me, and as well as, I'm happy to be part of this panel. There are some great examples of what people have been doing, and amidst crisis of COVID, as well as the social injustice going on in the country. So what I will do is I'll show you a quick overview of what kind of work or what kind of services we provide, so you get a context. So like Emory and Clemson, we are also a service that does not have geography department, even though we have a large setup here at NYU. Our services, data services, is a joint facility between NYU IT, which is a central IT, and the libraries. We started in 2008, and what it means is that we became a centralized facility for all things GIS and data-related services for the entire university. And because we don't have any geography department or GIS, division, that is kind of a blessing in disguise. So far, we have found that we have GIS users from almost every discipline. So you name it, history or epidemiology, food studies, urban planning, urban studies, big data, so on and so forth. And our journey has been from 2008 to 2020 now. I'll talk a little bit in the next slides. But the core of our services are that we have a lab, which is a teaching lab, as well as we have high-end computers for the students, faculty, and staff to work on their research projects or their homework. So we do consultations, about 4,000 plus consultations per year. We teach a lot of instruction or tutorials, what we call it, in GIS, as well as database, and all things that revolves around the research data lifecycle, which is the image on the right you see. We also do a sizable amount of what we call it course integrated sessions. So let's say a food studies faculty approaches us and say, I want you to teach story map within my class setting. So we'll embed it, more customize it. This is also a great bank for us in terms of getting the attendance and curated material because of the authority of the faculty. And then we do a couple of sessions in those courses, as well as to research groups, so on and so forth. And one of the showpiece of also data services is our data curation of spatial data. We have the geo.nyu.edu, which is a geo blacklight application for search and discovery of spatial data, and a lot of the data we curate as well. So talking about now with the crisis mode, the COVID hit, and we were all, and also with the social injustice, we were all for the COVID, we were forced to switch to remote mode. That also kind of more like a stopgap measure, right? You want to continue your service, what you used to provide, but we have an added challenge that not only we are big, but we also have global sites, well-established global sites, and that poses a challenge of time zones. How do you support people in that? So what have changed for us that we quickly started, realizing that we have a lot of partnerships or tap into partnerships and collaborations, tap into a global network, who can help out, who cannot. We had this whole base of consultations and tutorials, and we had, as data services, we had to come up with a quick turnaround and, hey, we have a dependency on the lab where people want to access these kind of software. Right now, we have virtual computer lab, but that's not up to the mark at that time. So we said, okay, let's restructure it a little bit. Let's do the tutorials, but more in a demo fashion than a hands-on workshop sessions. And rest consultations can be done via Zoom. We also actually experimented on something called, a virtual walk-in desk through multiple tools like Google Calendar and LipCal and so forth, so on and so forth. And that had its successes. Then there's another set of challenges that were posed, is that we teach a lot of tutorials, and a lot of our patrons, student, staff, faculty have a different learning pathways. They might take a GIS course, and an advanced GIS score, and a stats course, and data viz course, so on and so forth. Along with that, what NYU has now implemented is that Go Local. So folks who cannot come to United States on NYU campuses in states, they can go to the local sites and then get help or get the classes done there. So that poses a kind of a challenge as well. We started doing a lot of course embedded tutorials. I mean, that have increased for us over time, which was also strategic to a large extent. So all of these post-challenge kind of helped us look into two different kind of service delivery. One is synchronous and one is asynchronous. Asynchronous was not so much of our favorite ones, but some global campuses kind of asked us that, do you have asynchronous material? On the other hand, all our services we continue to provide. So we do consultations, we do training, but majority of the now course embedded sessions have started asking us to record the session for the students who could not attend that session during that time, or follow up and revisit it, which is very interesting to us. And that is something we have started looking a trend towards. The other thing from our experimentation on a live help, we are also experimenting on the AAL model, Ask a Librarian, which is a library-wide chat service on a real-time basis almost. So something we are experimenting into, that can we provide the same experience we used to in a physical setting pre-COVID into the post-COVID era. So for us, oops. So for us, the road ahead looks like, as what my other peers have talked about, and we have a lot to learn from them as well, is use of web tools or SaaS technologies, GIS Online. We have seen a huge surge in story maps as well as Survey 123. And then we are experimenting on AppStream as one of the virtualized environment, which we will see it happening for our courses as well. And we will be promoting local installation so that people will have choices of different modes to access all these services and consultations, training material, etc. One thing I would say that with the cloud or online teaching or even instruction, there is an opportunity. Like, we used to have a smaller lab where we used to restrict people for 12 to 24, and now we have kind of an opportunity to open it up to 100 or even more. So that's something we are looking into. Lastly, what we also focused a lot on is physical safety of our student, staff, and faculty, but also the psychological safety, especially looking at IDBE, which is inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity component of everyone. And that all these things also cascades to a degree where we have been, these days, we are supporting a lot of COVID research, and there's also mapping component to it. So that is something which is very exciting, as well as we thought that we have, as data services, have some sort of responsibility also to showcase data-driven approaches for social injustice. So we are working on that project, and that will be putting up live soon. And everybody's welcome to partner with us if you are interested. So that's something which is happening currently. And this is my information or data services link. I will quickly just show you, I think somebody was asking for resources. All our teaching material is posted on our website. And if you see, it's very well documented. You go to any of this, you will find documentation, you will find resources, data with it. All of it's free for the most part. So you can check it out. And you will be hearing from us about the social injustice data soon and the resources.
Fantastic. Thank you, Him. Could you just drop the link to the guide into the chat for everyone, please, while Miriam gets set up? And so our next speaker, Miriam Olivas, is the GIS librarian at the Marks Science and Social Science Library at Yale University. And Yale is an interesting institution in that it is the one of the 5 that has primarily a graduate student body, not so much undergraduate. So it's a little bit on the smaller size compared to NYU, and it is a private institution in the Northeast. So with that, Miriam, let's hear what you have to share.
Everything okay? That is the question we all have. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Can you see my
good.
screen? Okay, wonderful.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to Angie for always keeping all the GIS libraries together and GIS educators along. And also I want to acknowledge almost our 300 GIS educators who are attending right now. Big round of applause, because we have prevailed despite COVID and even the storm Isaias that I didn't have power until last night, midnight. So thank you for joining us today. Today I'm gonna present very quickly, just rushing. I promised to Angie that I was gonna just rush in infrastructure. Actually on my title I said transforming GIS support services during emergencies. So what we have learned with the quarantine and what we have to do. So I'm just sharing some ideas about infrastructure, instruction, consultations, and an initiative that we launched for the COVID, to map COVID, but just want to talk from the perspective of collaboration. So nothing new that you haven't heard. I just want to share the story and a little bit of more my perspective, not the institution itself. And we don't have coffee breaks, but please reach out if you are interested in implementing any that I mentioned here. So about infrastructure, we went from desktop to virtual computing. We were mainly desktop local machines on campus. There was no virtualization, meaning when you log in one lab and you go to the other, you wouldn't have the same desktop that you might be very familiar in other locations. Here, you would need to be tied to this one local machine or your computer. We have the challenges many other places that most of the students are Mac users, 80% for undergrads and 70% overall on campus. And because we are an Esri campus in terms of GIS teaching, that makes a little challenge or a big challenge, as you know. VM installation was happening, but there was always problems, mostly because of the computing power of the laptops owned by students. So post-COVID, what I want to share is it was an interesting approach, because at the very beginning, of course, we asked, can we go virtual? And there were so many concerns, including budgeting, that we didn't have an open communication regarding that. But as you saw, as the quarantine process evolved, universities were consulting with peers and emulating decision making. So that was fabulous, because it seems everyone started jumping into the boat, like, we gotta do something. And that happened for us. IT Central, before I was able to bring some ideas, IT Central, they started working with forestry. Professor Tomlin is there, and Scott Romach, who's amazing as always at the front of the trenches to make things happen for GIS. So they started deploying virtual Windows virtual desktops, and from there, after the pilot happened, they launched for entire campus. So that was a gigantic step, I would say, because we were wanting this long time ago. I've been at Yale since 2015, but GIS at Yale has been available since 1990s through the library and other collaborators. But also think about some of the students at Yale have been very focused in GIS. That is Professor Dana Tomlin and his map algebra, as well as geocoding. If you Google it, you'll find out about it. So anyway, what I'm saying this is because we really wanted to move forward, but sometimes it's not that easy. One thing that I want to mention is I'm very proud of my institution, because our IT collaborators and everyone, administrators and decision makers, they make possible that we get things done, but I also see that they really do things right. What do I mean by that? Is that sometimes people make things happen, but they just look to the other side and they don't check licensing and anything that put it in jeopardy, like data storage, etc. So that is what I really like about the processing and decision making that happens in our institution. And more I see that they are becoming more agile, and that is always a pleasure when you try to teach GIS and you enable your campus. That helps a lot. So let's talk about instruction. Is asynchronous the answer? I wanted to share my experience because it happened that when I was back at Texas A&M, I actually started working with the students. I have always worked with a team of students. I've been very lucky about that. And at that time, we produced only 12 videos, but I just wanted to share the stats with you. So far, the videos are still used on YouTube, and it has 600,000 views, all of them together. Whereas at Yale, we launched a different program. PhD students, consultants, helped us to produce serious workshops that are asynchronous. And we did that since 2017. The data is included. Someone asked about having the resources available. This in particular, this program was done with a platform called Panopto, so it requires NetID authentication, and it is a very different approach. And as you can see, we have 114 hours overall. Why? Because students and faculty and staff and researchers are so smart that they just start at the beginning and they don't finish. You would think, oh, it's because they get bored. Not only that, it's because they get it really quickly. I see that in consultations. So I would say that it's a mix. I wouldn't say that the long workshops do not work. It's just you serve a different group, which are those who can never come to your workshops during the times that you offer. And of course, we have asynchronous from other sources like MOOCs, tutorials, or Esri virtual training, I'm sorry. But what I want to talk also is about the registered courses, because we have faculty members teaching. That is our first priority, to encourage anyone to take those, and faculty members even allow researchers and other professors to join and audit the class. So that is fantastic to see that how a full or associate professor would sit down in a classroom for a whole semester. So, and then we have many library-led workshops, many topics from intro, advanced, open source, and also Esri-based softwares, including notebooks that we offer this summer, and we will continue developing that because we are very excited that we integrated Esri notebooks already. So one thing that is a little different too is that with the typo that I have there, I'm sorry, but we are using story maps to guide training. We started at the library, and now we have a faculty member that is putting together lessons and a story map. So I thought that is pretty neat and very easy to manipulate the platform. So I encourage you to do that with hyperlinks, etc. One challenge is the second instructor. For us, it's very important to have a second instructor to bring those who get behind together with those that have more skills. Because you can be a bad instructor and you need to give some help, or maybe they have never been exposed to the technology and you really need to help them. So how do you do that in a virtual environment? If you have some answers, let me know. The breakout rooms, I don't like that for people who get behind. So that would be a wonderful conversation that I like to be part of. So GIS consultations, I don't have anything new to tell you other than what you do, other than I have learned that during consultations, it is very important to bring the human touch to those. I don't see the value for a consultation of what I can teach if I can give them a link, but I have few things here added, like giving them the user shortcuts so they don't get so much trouble getting a task complete. talking about how learning that will help them enhancing not only job hunting, but I'm talking about even faculty members who might want to collaborate with others. So I focus a lot on GIS foundations because I know they might not come back after they learn, let's say, RGS online. But I focus also a lot on the human side and letting them know that they can count on us when they get stuck. And most likely, those would be the valuable items that they take from consultations, including connecting with researchers across campus, but around the world. I think that is one of my tasks and my hobbies. I do it during work time and outside work because I really like to connect people. And then I'm going to go on the last part, that is the Yale COVID mapping initiative. I just wanted to say, as many institutions, we start mapping COVID cases, but I just want to highlight this team is a team of students, faculty, and staff. Everybody brought passion and expertise, and I think the passion was the ingredient that made this happening. We started mapping the COVID data that we wanted, but then we learned that we had many people across campus that wanted to help. So we did a call for proposals, and it's the reason why I want to share. Maybe you want to do this in your campus. A call for proposals. We didn't offer money or funding, but we offer guidance and GIS expertise. We promised the calendar year as our commitment to help. And also we did a two-phase applications. The first one, we just asked 3 questions. And those who pass the first round, then we'll send little extra questions to learn about if the data was ready, etc. We did stand-up meetings every morning, and nobody misses those meetings. It seems like everybody's very happy. We communicate through Slack, and I believe we have more than 35 people in the Slack channel where we have communication for different projects. So there's no time to talk more about it, but I just wanted to bring this idea to your attention in case you want to launch something like this. I would be more than happy to brainstorm with you so it happens. But you can visit, I'm going to share on the chat the link so you can visit and see the kind of maps that we've been producing. And this is my email. In case you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Wow,
So,
that is fantastic, Miriam. Holy cow, you are always so busy. I love the COVID task force. So we do have a few minutes for a little bit of discussion. So I'm going to, let's see, could all of the panelists turn their cameras back on so we can see everybody? And with that, the first question is a 2-part question. So I'm curious about how common it is to have a map library or geospatial data center, whatever you might call it, being housed and funded out of a university library rather than out of an academic department like geography. So yeah, we kind of have the deck a little bit stacked today. We're all library folks, so maybe you're not a representative sample. Maybe the second part of the question is more interesting. Curious whether the uptake in the use of GIS is higher when GIS services are centralized under the library. And so I think, you know, you could all have some thoughts about that. The one thing I would say is, I don't think it's necessarily higher when it's housed in a library versus housed in a geography department. I think the key is that you make an effort to have community outreach and things like that. And I think that's what has really made the difference for a lot of the library folks. So maybe you all could speak to, you know, what have you done in terms of outreach to build community to make the use of GIS spread throughout your institution? So maybe we'll start with Patricia.
Yeah, so I think, you know, so it's a very interesting question because I think GIS services being part of the library, we are a catalyst. So we had a slide where we show like we are a catalyst, we're a support for all departments. Our mission is just to enable our community. And so we started traditionally with the licensing, with credits, things like that. But for us, I mean, our center has been around for like 4 years, and I cannot tell you like the change in the faculty after a couple of years when they see we're there for them. So if it's a grant, it's a collaboration, it's credits, it's you know, support for a class, what they see is a partner, is a support. They're not alone in dealing with what's new, what has changed, what, you know, can you teach this part? And so, I mean, I just had a faculty last week saying, I don't know what we will do without you. And things have changed so much because they had a lot of facilities, but not that human support. And so it's been very gratifying, but also it has lifted a big heavy weight that a lot of this faculty had in the past. So that's just been my experience.
Yeah. So Ross, I know that Cal Poly has a geography program, but again, you know, you also do a lot to serve the community. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship and, you know, how you work together with geography?
Sure. And we have a number of different pockets where GIS exists and is used heavily across campus. And we do have the anthropology geography program, but it's relatively small compared to some like really well-established large university geography programs. So we see geography, but also city and regional planning, and that's in the College of Architecture, and then wildlife biology, which is part of College of Science and Math. So we see all these different pockets. And I think what is nice is kind of building your network, and you have a few faculty champions who are there in those areas. And that helps to extend your reach, because as new faculty come aboard, they will get to know folks in their department in college, and then they will be a connection back into the library. And the nice thing about being in the library is that you are there and available to all those different areas once they kind of find their way to the services.
Yeah, fantastic. Miriam, him, Megan, any of you? Yeah, so I think him.
Yeah. Okay, go him first.
That's why I stand first, sorry.
I'll go quickly. So I think I agree with.
You're a little faint, him. Can you speak up?
Yeah, can you hear me?
That's better, yep.
Okay, great. So I agree with the sentiment that, you know, GIS services in the libraries have much more kind of advantages. And why I say so is generally, I mean, these days, if you see the role of libraries have changed from just traditional book to more like research commons, you know, supporting data-driven research and so on and so forth. And not only that, I think library brings something which is very unique, which is what we call it public service skills to the equation, which is a human touch, as well as, you know, subject matter expertise like subject librarians. So you can get a full circle experience in one go, and they are very good with warm handoffs. And I think that is something to be learned from the libraries. Having said that, I completely understand that, you know, some universities may have departmental needs and you know, higher usage. As long as I would say that they make an effort to also reach out to the larger campus to support GIS, I think either way, or wherever there is more activity happening, I think you should house it there, or a satellite version of it.
Great. Yep. Miriam, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to share 2 secrets that everybody might know, but I really love that the library is a neutral place. So library helps to bring groups together and have conversations that otherwise wouldn't happen. I've seen that over and over. So fostering collaboration, and also groups feel the library is not a competing unit, and then they start opening up, and then they receive collaborators from other parts. And the second thing also is that I love that most of the libraries have a model where they cannot charge. Even if they are spending money, I have heard, yeah, but we cannot charge. We don't have a way to charge. So when we offer the service, regardless how much we had to invest, it ends up to be free for our users. And I really like that because it enables the possibility to continue with research even when there's no funding.